All right, and we are live. Hello, everyone. How are you all doing? Um, I'm really excited to get the show started. Welcome to PM Therapy Podcast. We're just gonna give people a few minutes to join because I know people normally join a few minutes in. So if you can hear us, please just let us know in the chat, and also you let us know where you're calling in from. I usually like to get a good idea of where people are calling in from. All right. All right, then. All right. So as people are showing up, please just let us know if you can hear us in the chat. All right. So the topic today is agile becoming obsolete. All right. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. I'm really looking forward to learning, and I think we have the right guest to talk about this. His name is Nigel. Nigel has been a pioneer in the agile space for a very long time. And I'm going to let him introduce himself. But Nigel was the first Chief of Agile at Toyota Connected. So I think that says a lot. And he's done many more things. But without further ado, Nigel, do you want to introduce yourself for those that don't know who you are?
Yeah, I do. And I can see people are already joining from Texas, so that's awesome. So, welcome to everybody from the great state of Texas. I'm in Dallas, or just north of Dallas. Um, I've been very lucky. I started life as a project manager. I started life many years ago as an engineer. I had a technical background. And this was when we still used punch cards on computers. And I'm really not making that up. That is the truth. So I did a lot of technical stuff, and then eventually found that people would pay me more for being a technical manager. And then I found people would pay me more for being a project manager. And so I fell into project management, Prince 2 as it was in Europe and the UK, and latterly PMP stuff over in the States. But I spent a lot of time in various different technology sectors. And when I eventually was lucky enough to join Toyota in Belgium, they taught me everything I knew that was wrong. So I'd learned all this stuff for years and then realized I was completely wrong. I thought they were completely wrong, by the way, when I first joined. And I used to tell my wife I was resigning every day for the first 6 months. And then suddenly it clicked and I realized, hey, they may know what they're talking about. And so Toyota transformed the way I thought. And then through my different parts of my career, through various management roles, fortunate some sort of leadership roles, I eventually ended up working with, Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-creators of Scrum, latterly then working with Ken Schwaber's organization and still do as a professional Scrum trainer. And as you say, I was lucky enough to eventually go back to Toyota as a team member and be hired as their Chief of Agile through Toyota Connected. And they let me train about 5,000 people across the world in all things agile and Scrum and how it related to Toyota's production system and lean thinking. So that's a little bit about me. Now I just cause trouble and make a lot of noise on LinkedIn in between people paying me to do some real work.
Nice. Thanks for that introduction. So just before we go on, just wanna recognize folks. So we have folks tuning in from all over. So Rob from Boston, Justin from Texas. Hey, Deepa from the Bay Area, Malika from Tunisia, Ziad from Lebanon, Dominic from Paris, and Bilal from Doha. It's amazing.
Oh, you're not kidding. I'm just going to give a shout out to Doha because my son was in Qatar doing the World Cup commentary not so long ago. So just a shout out to the folks there. But it's amazing to see people from all over the world.
Yeah, amazing. And these are the people that just responded. I'm sure there are many more people that are not. So
You're a popular guy, Mukhtar, obviously.
no, I think they're all here to see you. All right, so now let's get on with it. Um, so the topic is agile becoming obsolete. We've had agile for decades now, and it's just one of these topics that or methodologies that people either really love it or they really hate it or people are just resigned to use it. And some people say, okay, people are not implementing agile well. So before we sort of delve into some of the specifics, um Nigel, maybe can you maybe take us back in time? Like, why did agile come up in the first place, and maybe how has it sort of evolved up until now? Is that a fair question? I mean, just
You'd be better asking one of the 21 folks that wrote the manifesto, but I got a little bit of insight in there, and I've been fortunate enough to meet and speak to quite a few of them over the years and work with a couple of them. Look, people forget we had things like rational unified process, RUP, from IBM days, and which is what SAFe was born from. Scaled Agile Framework was born out of that. Leffingwell was involved with RUP, as was even my friend from Scrum.org, David runs Scrum.org for Ken Schwaber. He was the product owner for stuff in the days of RUP when Leffingwell was there. So there's a whole lot of history and a bit of that. So there was other methods like DSDM and other things that had sort of predated what we consider is the current Agile sort of methodology crop. But traditional project management had been around for forever. I mean, Henry Gantt lived in the early 1900s, although it's suggested he may have stolen the idea for the Gantt chart from a Polish inventor who didn't actually speak English. So there's a whole bit of history there. But bring it up to more into modern times. So Jeff and Ken were working on the ideas for Scrum in the early 90s, and they've got different anecdotes about how that came around. And in 1995, they published a paper at a software conference just down the road in Austin, Texas, called Obsolete, sort of object-oriented programming conference. And they published their white paper on Scrum, and Scrum was born officially in 1995 and introduced a more iterative approach to doing project management, for want of better words. And people get all hung up about, don't use the word project with Agile. Well, we passed all that nonsense now. And so they came up with a better way of working. And a lot of it is based on the Toyota production system. Ken will tell you his influences was TPS, the Toyota production system. Jeff will say the same. The empirical side of it really came from Ken Schwaber's brother at DuPont, a chemicals giant. They were using empirical process control, so that influenced them to build this empirical sort of loop. But if people know anything about Toyota and Plan, Do, Check, Act, or the Deming version PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, it's an iterative process, and that was really what Scrum was. And of course, in the meantime, Kent Beck had been firing up the extreme programming movement with lots of things like pair programming and other techniques in there. And so at a point in time, all these folks knew each other, and they all got together in a great ski resort in Utah called Snowbird. They all went skiing, drank too many beers, I'm guessing, and then over a couple of days scribbled a bunch of ideas on, I assume, Post-it notes, and came up with their manifesto. These 4 key points in the manifesto, and then latterly the sort of the principles that flowed from that, and came up with an idea to sort of bring these worlds together. So the Scrum folks and the sort of XP folks and maybe some of the old DSDM and RUP folks, and came up with this whole idea for Agile as a sort of a way of describing how they thought work should be approached differently than how it had been approached before. And to be fair, there's nothing wrong with the manifesto. But the manifesto is a philosophy. It's not a methodology. It's an alignment of ideas that sort of says we sort of broadly agree that philosophically this is the way we should approach doing work. And that's very different from a bunch of methodologies that are sort of cropped up throughout. So that's a little bit of the history. Now, of course, there's other people out there, better commentators than me on it, but that's not a bad sort of summary of where we came from and to.
Yeah, no, that was amazing. I really like that setup. By the way, we're going to be having Jeff, on the podcast. I think it might be next week. So, you all stay tuned. But if not next week, sorry, no, it might be in a couple of weeks. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Yeah, really looking forward to that as well. By the way, for those of you that are listening, I know many of you would have questions, so please just leave them in the chat. We'll get to the questions as in due time. So I really love that setup, Nigel. What did Agile get right? Let's start there, and then we'll go to what are the challenges with Agile.
So Okay, so if we try and separate the manifesto as a philosophy from the idea of agile methods and approaches, and then we can separate agile from agility, depending on how people look at things as nouns and verbs and adjectives and things. But the reality of it is, in certain mechanistic type projects, things that if you're building a house, you have to dig the ground and put the foundations before you can build the roof. Now, you can build the roof as a sub-assembly and bring it in later and put it on the top of the house, and indeed that type of thing happens. But in a lot of projects, things are very linear in nature. And traditional project management, and the Hoover Dam is known for being the first big project where they use the Gantt chart, if some of my history anecdotes are correct. So if you're going to build the Hoover Dam, traditional linear project management, Gantt chart type planning might be okay. And there's still a place for that type of project management today. But if you're working in an area where things are very rapid, very fluid, they're non-linear, and we get into the conversations around complex problems and complexity thinking, and we get into the things where we don't have linear causality, so there's no real root cause, we need a different way of thinking. We need to be able to respond more rapidly to things that are evolving and changing. Now, when you talk about Scrum and the original concepts that sort of come out the Agile Manifesto, it's more about talking to the customer and understanding the customer's needs and getting continuous conversation with the customer, getting continuous feedback from the customer, so you understand that what you're building is actually what the customer requires. And the idea of that is you deliver a better quality product, you reduce your cost of delivery because you're not wasting money on building things that aren't going to sell or aren't going to be used by the end user, the customer, whatever that might be. And you might be in an environment, hell, we are now, of course, nowadays with AI and everything else, we're in an environment that's so fast moving that decisions we make this week are out of date next week. And even for me as a professional in the industry, just keeping up with the trends and the technology and the way things are moving and changing is incredibly hard to do. So if you're doing something where you write requirements for 6 months before you start doing any work, you are going to be out of date, and that's a fact. And so depending on the context, and context is key here, we need to choose the appropriate techniques and methods and approaches that suit the contextual situation we're in the fast-moving, dynamic nature potentially of the industry. So the original idea behind the sort of agile ways of working, if you prefer, is that things change and need to change and need to adapt, and we need this continuous dialogue with our customers to ensure that we are building the right thing. Now, if you fast forward on a bit from that, we're moving away from a fixed methodology sort of, and we'll talk about the term mindset later, but because that's a fully loaded term. But this idea, this mindset of we just use Scrum and everything is Scrum, nothing but Scrum, which is how the early Scrum teaching was. You either do this or that, and that was Scrum, and nothing else matters. You just do Scrum. There's no project manager. There's no anything else other than the Scrum team. Well, that was nonsense, by the way. I mean, it was proven to be nonsense. But we've moved away from that now. And my work and the work of a lot of professionals in the industry are now looking at what we call an assembly of methods, and something from the French word assemblages, which is sort of novel emergence. You bring together lots of different tools, techniques, methods, and approaches, which allows you to address a context you currently are in. And as the context evolves, which it will over time, the markets, the customers, the technology evolves, you evolve the tools, techniques, methods, and approaches you're using. And that's truly agile. I mean, that's extremely agile, because we're not now constraining ourselves to only use SAFe or only use Scrum or only use whatever. We can now use whatever's appropriate in the given context at a given time. And as time evolves and context changes or evolves, we can evolve our methods, tools, techniques, and approaches. Now, to a degree, SAFe tried to achieve that badly by just throwing all these sort of methods into a pot and then trying to create a prescriptive way of using them. And that was a huge problem. And of course, they didn't invent any of those methods. They took methods and approaches that other people had created and tweaked them slightly. But essentially, we are now in a space where the industry and technology is moving so rapidly, and geopolitical and customer needs and technology changes are moving so rapidly, that we need to be very agile. We need to be able to pick and choose and select our techniques and our methods and our approaches to suit that context. So what was born in Agile was, here's a better way of working, and for these good reasons, good values and principles, nothing wrong with any of them. But that also then became more a religion. It started to become, well, if you don't go to the Church of Scrum and you don't, do what we used to call the 3-5-3 of Scrum, the 3 roles, the 5 events, the 3 artifacts, then you weren't agile. You were, you were a heathen and you should be cast out from the fold, all this sort of nonsense. And what people suddenly realize, and there's a question about Scrum as well, a scaling approach came around, because guess what? One team couldn't do all the work. And it might have been interesting for people to talk to each other in different teams. We call that, funnily enough, is a word that's very famous we use, called communication. And back in my days of project management, I used to call it the 3 C's of project management: communication, communication, communication. And so, we started to realize that, one team couldn't do everything and Scrum was limited in some ways. What about the portfolio? What about finance? Do we have a Scrum team in HR? Do we have a Scrum? And things just got silly. Let's do Scrum everywhere. And so, and people wonder why it struggled and it failed and didn't catch on in some companies. And then you wanted the CEO to be a Scrum team. Now, Jeff will come on and talk about Scrum at Scale. And I worked very closely with Jeff during the creation of Scrum at Scale. And the first real major implementation, at least in my experience, was at 3M HIS Healthcare over in Salt Lake City and across their various offices, where we sort of developed the product owner meta Scrum. Because it turned out people who didn't build software for a living but worked in management actually needed to talk to each other. And maybe some of them were product owners, but some of them were in the high levels of portfolio. And guess what? It might be an idea if they had a conversation with each other, because a lot of products aren't a singular product. They're standalone products that can be sold in their own right, but you can combine them in bundles. I'm thinking of, for the American audience, Flo on the progressive TV advertisements, where she says, you want to bundle your home insurance, your motorcycle insurance, your car insurance, your boat insurance. Well, the same thing in product delivery. You may have lots of distinct products, but a lot of companies combine products together to create a package of products to serve a customer's needs. And that's more of a portfolio exercise about how we take different products and combine them to make a new product offering to sell to our customers. Well, then you start to think there's lots of management involved in that. Lots of people who don't build the software or build the products, but are very much responsible for packaging, promoting, selling, delivering those deals. Well, it might be an idea that they actually have a conversation with each other to coordinate the work in all these different Agile or Scrum teams that are doing the building. So that's where the product owner meta Scrum sort of came around, because we needed something between the CEO and the people building the software. And the Scrum of Scrums was just a way of scaling impediment resolution, things like the executive action team that Jeff came up with, which is a very good pattern, by the way, and I'm sure he'll talk a lot about patterns. So, so what did Agile get right? Recognizing that everything isn't linear with simple causality and can be planned many months in advance. They got that right. What did they get wrong? Well, the religious sort of, fanaticism around specific methodologies. You're either doing this and only this and nothing but this. And the irony is, Agile's supposed to be flexible, but a lot of Agilists became inflexible. So there was the oxymoron. They became the inagile or the non-agile or the inflexible approach to doing things, which was meant to be, what's the problem? What's the appropriate approaches to help solve the problem or build the product or build the solution and work with the beneficiaries of that work? And let's use whatever works. And instead it was, no, we're rigid, we're dogmatic, we're only going to do this. And then you wondered why we struggled with certain companies.
Right.
That was a long answer, by the way. I'm sorry.
No, but that was I think that was really fascinating. I really loved the context and how you arrived there. So a couple of things now. I think one of the things that you mentioned is we've sort of evolved, whereby we have this assembly of methods, right? As the context evolves, we pick and choose what's appropriate to address the context. So I guess my question is, what changed between, I guess, maybe when Agile first came out to now, where we had to evolve beyond what we had in the first place with Agile? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And, unfortunately, this is where we have to talk about the pyramid selling schemes. Agile did not become a way. If you look at the manifesto and what it says and what it was directing was as a better way of doing work and helping those that do work. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically it. What it evolved into was a better way of selling certificates and training. So it became a PDF marketing business, and that's, to be fair, that's how SAFe built its empire on selling certification. And I'm fortunate to know a lot of the people who designed a lot of those schemes. So it all became about doing training. Well, training was easy. We call it, this. I have some slides on this I should show you, but we have things called the animals of project management, and one of them is seagull project management. Yeah. Otherwise known as the swoop and poop approach. So you swoop and you make a big pile of mess and you fly away, and that was training. So you would arrive, you do 2 days of training, get paid a ton of money, and I do mean a ton of money, leave everybody with a PDF certificate in their email, see you, good luck, and off you go. The coaching bit was really tough and really hard and of course expensive. And the challenge was that Scrum or whatever Agile method was being taught, whether it's Kanban approaches today, and I'd go off on a whole rant about Kanban later, but whatever you're teaching, they're a tool. They're a tool set. They're a set of things that help you do certain things in certain contexts. But of course, the religious zealots came in. I was part of them originally. We'd have our Scrum uniforms on, and we'd have our Scrum Bible in our hand, and we'd preach the gospel according to Jeff and Ken, and then leave. And we wondered why it didn't work. Nobody actually went in and spent months and months and months understanding what the challenges of the company was, how to solve those challenges. We just came in and said, do Scrum, everything will be fine. Feed the hungry, and world peace will reign. And that's what Agile became. And that's why Agile has died from a point of view of training. So all the people involved in training certification now are queuing up for food stamps because they're all struggling to find work. And I have Scrum Masters calling me, and this is very sad, but I have Scrum Masters and even product owners calling me every week saying, I've lost my job, I've been made redundant, I don't know what to do. How do I reinvent myself? Which I suppose is an important thing for a lot of people listening, and you specialize in helping people gain careers in project management and project-related careers. Project management is not dead. People need to realize it never died. Program management is actually a fantastic career choice because the best program managers are those that can wrap their arms around an organization and bring people together to collaborate and to communicate. We call those boundary spanners in some of my work. We didn't invent the term, it's a management term. But those sort of roles are important. People who are really good at change and change management and the effect of change on people and business and product is really important. And I think that's where Agile is evolving to. The concept of agility, even the concept within the philosophy of the Agile Manifesto, all good and is necessary and needed. We don't want rigidity in our approaches. There's no resilience, and resilience is a synonym for agility or for Agile. So we want the ability to respond rapidly as the market shifts. Bitcoin's up, Bitcoin's down, the stock market's up, the stock market's down. Every time Trump sneezes, the stock market reacts. I mean, that's just the reality, but that's a complex adaptive system. And you need to be able to respond rapidly to that because that's agility. So the reality of it is that the concept of being agile and the emergence of agility is still solid. But it's not about teaching religious methodology and waving a certificate. It's about how you become adaptable, how you can respond, how the organization can be adaptable and respond to geopolitical events, to market changes, to recessions, to boom, to bust, to different products, to the Chinese flooding. At the moment, the Chinese can't bring electric cars into America. So we have a monopoly that Tesla and a few others can enjoy. What happens tomorrow if suddenly they allow the Chinese to import electric vehicles, half the price, great car, I mean, they are really good cars, into the American market? How do you respond as a automotive manufacturer? That's agility, that's resilience, and that's all still very relevant. But Agile killed itself from a point of view of making it all about training and certification, not about solving problems for organizations. Now, of course, within companies, Agile still exists. There are teams working using these tools and techniques and methods, and there are leaders in these organizations that are working to find better ways of solving problems for these organizations to be more effective, more performant. But they're not doing that by reading the Scrum guide. I can guarantee that. Some teams may be using Scrum. Some people may be using some form of Kanban-esque type of visual flow on their boards. But that isn't transforming how companies work. That's just giving them tools that are effective within that context at that time. And I can tell you now, there aren't any leaders that I know in executive leadership that have got Kanban boards in their offices and are walking around with the Scrum guide in their hand, preaching the role of the product owner. That just never happened. And unfortunately, we believed that they would, and they never did.
Right. Nigel, so I think part of the appeal of, let's say, how do I want to spin this? Okay, so we are in an environment that's becoming more complex, as you mentioned. There's just a lot of change and you have to adapt. But I think that a lot of times human beings crave for certainty and structure. Like, just, what do I need to do to make things okay, or to handle this chaos, to wrangle this chaos, right? But now, if we're moving to this sort of way where it's like, okay, it's all about understanding the context and, bringing together a different set of tools. I feel like how do you sort of train people to be able to meet the moment? Because the moment will never be the same. The challenges will always be different. So how do people become equipped to be able to meet the moment, whatever the moment is?
So it's an interesting question, because what we desire is stability as humans. You mentioned this. And one of the things I've been talking about a lot at the moment is what we call variation. Now, a very famous guy back in the day, Walter Shewart, who was the birth of statistical quality control, what Motorola later called Six Sigma, and that's a whole different podcast, webcast, whatever, for the future. But he talked a lot about variation. And in simple manufacturing terms, you want stability, you want leveled workflow. Japanese, we call it hijunk, or a leveled workflow. We want predictability, stability, everything running efficiently, because we can predict how long it's going to take to produce an order of X parts. So if we're making a lot of Sharpies, we can do some simple prediction about what we need to produce an order of these Sharpies to a customer. But once you get into the sort of, not just software, but there is a lot of work which isn't predictable, and it changes continuously. And we can think of many examples potentially of that. So, and I've worked even within the farming community, where you can't always be certain the crops are going to yield the products you want. So there's variation built into that. And then we have to be deciding how we adapt to that variation. But Shewart did a lot of work on variation. And what we try and do in any organization, even in things where there's a complex element, is stabilize what we can control. What can we control? What can we stabilize? What tools, methods, approaches, what processes can we put in place to control that, to calm down the noise? Because, the last thing, if we're trying to concentrate doing work, there's a lot of noise going on, metaphorically. It's very difficult to be focused and to concentrate. But then when we know we're in an environment where things will come out of left field, will surprise us, will make it difficult, what methods and approaches do we put in place to handle that? How do we catch that? And what do we do when it happens? And we can have a method or an approach or a process to cope with that volatility. Whilst the volatility may be chaotic at first, we can have approaches to calm that and to actually manage it in a controlled way. Now, of course, Dave Snowden's work with the Cynefin framework and the things he talks about, the different domains and ontological states of work, that helps us to focus, to say something's occurring. What does that look like? Is this something we can apply a standard process, what people may call best practice to? Is it something when we need to assemble some experts? It's still controllable, we understand it, but we need to collaborate to solve. Or is it truly complex, unpredictable? We don't know what we know until we know it. And therefore we need to do some safe to fail experiments, which is where Scrum really is powerful, because it can go out. It's not really meant to be doing planned work, which is how it is used constantly now, of course. And if you can plan the work, it's not complex, folks. Just let that sink in for a minute. If the work is plannable, it's predictable, it's not unpredictable. There might be a little bit of variation, but generally it's predictable. So if you can plan a sprint, it's not complex work. So the thing is, if it truly is out of control, then we can have ways to say, okay, how do we make sense of where we are now? We call this sense making. How do we then, and there's tools and techniques for that, how do we then run some safe to fail experiments to learn more about the situation we're in or the problem we're facing? And even Toyota do this with what's called set-based concurrent engineering. They'll run multiple parallel experiments, all trying to solve the same problem, so they can choose which option to follow later in the stage. The XP folks would call that the last responsible moment. So we delay our decision making until the last moment that's still responsible, we're still in control. And that helps us make better decisions. So there are techniques and tools out there that people can learn, and organizations can coach their team members and their engineers and their contributors in these to control some of that chaos. Because look, if you talk about emergency response teams, EMT as we call them in the USA, but an incident occurs. Maybe there's an explosion in a factory, maybe there's a fire, maybe there's a road traffic incident. That's chaotic. It's definitely, it's actually chaos. It's not just complex. We're in an uncontrollable situation. But the people highly skilled and highly trained at how to execute in that environment make sense of it, do the sense making, and then start to control what they can control. It's no different in an organization, a company situation. Hopefully it's not as dramatic as some of those examples, but people can be trained. And that's why, an assembly method, and somebody says, is that a hybrid approach? Well, if that's what you want to call it, I wouldn't call it hybrid agile. I'd just call it agile, because you've got a whole bunch of things. I mean, I go into my garage to work on a motorcycle and I changed the clutch on one the other day, and I couldn't get the clutch to go back in. That was unexpected. It wasn't planned for. So now I have a range of tools and a range of options to work out what the problem is that's stopping the clutch going back in, and then use different tools that I didn't plan to use to facilitate it. In this case, a rubber mallet, and tapped it. But my point is that this is exactly what we mean when we talk about an assembly and methods, where we can control something, we control it. We have tools, techniques, methods, approaches, process. But where we aren't able to predict, we can at least have a way to approach the unpredictable, and then have a range of options we could potentially deploy when we understand the unpredictable more. And that really, isn't that the heart of being agile,
Right. That makes complete sense. What about, because one thing that I'm thinking of now is maybe a new PM or an up and coming PM. So with what you described now, isn't this a lot? because you're talking about, like assessing a very complex situation, and then there is like a plethora of tools and techniques that you can deploy,
Yep.
surgically in the particular, like this just seems like it can be overwhelming as opposed to I'm just going to learn my scrum and just see what happens when I do my scrum and stand-ups and all of that. Like, but like this, new way of thinking, if I can call it that, doesn't isn't it overwhelming? And is this something that maybe even new PMs can aspire to?
I think the first thing is you need to be continuous learners. I mean, Peter Senge and others have talked about this in books they've written over the years about learning organizations, but just from an individual point of view, is if all you want to do is go do a 2-day course and get a Scrum Master certificate or a Scrum, and then proclaim to the world you know how to run a giant multinational corporation better than the CEO, I think you're delusional. I think that's the problem with a lot of people. They go and what we used to call book smart people. You go grab a book off the shelf here, you skim it, you go, I'm an expert on lean. I can now advise this 10,000 person organization how to better structure their organization. No, you can't. That's complete delusion. And unless you've done those roles and worked in those roles and hired people and had to let people go and solve complex business challenges and problems, you're not qualified to advise them. You may have some knowledge, you don't have experience. So the first thing is you need to be continuously learning, continuously studying. Even I am. I mean, I'm in my early 60s now, and I'm learning every single day. I'm learning in so many different facets and things. So with the age of AI, and I know there's some questions about AI in the thing, 2 years ago, I knew very little about AI. And so I had to spend a huge amount of time. I knew all the old stuff about AI before it became, Chat GPT and all this sort of open AI stuff. So I spent a tremendous amount of time studying, learning, practicing, using the tools. A lot of my time, which was discretionary, was spent on learning. And people have to make that work-life balance. Do I want to invest more in becoming more attractive to an employer, or do I want to spend more time going to the football game and having fun with my friends and doing whatever? And, there is a balance. And I do not think there's anything wrong in being more family-oriented and fun-oriented than business. But you have to set the balance. If you're very weighted in the fun side, you can't expect them to become the CEO of a company. There is sacrifice both ways. And it's a personal decision that people have to make. But you need to be Dave Snowden gave me this phrase years ago, and I describe it myself as an expert generalist. Now, people used to talk about T-shaped people in, the agile movement, but an expert generalist has a range of knowledge, skills, and experiences in different areas. They may have deep expertise in certain of them, and don't go drawing weird shapes to try and represent this, as people do this all the time, and all these weird diagrams come out online now. But it's about having a broad experience. Now, in real life, you have a broad experience. Your children, you have education, you have your work life, you have your personal life. You may have hobbies. You may play musical instruments. You may paint. You may, like me, mess around with old motorcycles. That's a broad range of experience. You just need to translate that into your working life. So as a new project manager, learning the basics of the PMP or Prince2 or whatever the approach they're following is, that doesn't preclude you or exclude you from learning lots of other things. So if you're going to be a project manager in a technology space, you might want to learn a little bit about the technology. You might want to learn a little bit about hardware and software, even the AI stuff, and we're now getting these questions on this about what we call HAT, human and AI, or human agent teaming. So how does AI now become a member of the team? How does it become a member of the project management team or the software delivery team or the Scrum team, whatever that is? What's the role for that? So if you don't understand those things, you may understand the PMBOK, cover to cover, but how's that going to help you function in the real world where people don't pick up the Scrum guide or the PMBOK or the whatever safe route and follow it to the letter? It becomes adaptive, agile. So you as an individual, and I wrote something and I pulled it up on screen while you're asking the question. And I talked about people being like a continuous improvement coach and talked about, first, you need a deep mastery a grounding in AI, in artificial intelligence now. We need to understand things like what do we mean by continuous improvement, what we do mean in the lean world, the Toyota terminology, what we mean by true lean thinking. You need the agile skills. So what do the different facets and offshoots of agile talk about? So do you understand enough about Kanban methodologies, flow metrics, these types of phrases people raise? But then do you have a technical literacy? Do you have a basic understanding about AI, machine learning, robotics? Because AI is coming in the physical world fast. You have to look what the Chinese are doing with robotics to know that factories will be full of robots. And look at what Elon Musk is talking about with robotics. You are going to have robotics in factories soon. So do you know anything about that? Because if you don't, how are you going to manage a project where robotics is being deployed and utilized? Data fluency. Can you interpret insights and translate them into actions? So what do you know about data science? What do you know about business intelligence? These things. What about ethics? Do you have any ethical knowledge or understanding and beliefs? I'm not talking about religions now. I'm talking about, risks, biases, job displacement, these types of things. What have you read anything? Have you studied this? Do you have an opinion? Do you have any expertise or experience in this? What about change leadership, managing resistance, coaching teams, fostering adoption? And then the program manager piece. And I think program managers are greatly underrated and been ignored for a long time because of all the agile noise. Orchestration. So bridging IT, engineering, human resources, operations to align initiatives. And that skill, what we call boundary spanning, which goes into other aspects as well, making decisions, financing, procurement. If you don't have this broad, wide range of understanding, and then gradually over time building experience as you do more work and more jobs, then you are not going to be a very well-rounded, agile practitioner. And if it's like, I argue with software engineers for years about front-end, back-end, middleware. When I started programming, you wrote the requirements, you wrote the specifications, you did all the coding, you did all the testing, and there was no front-end, back-end, middleware. You just did it. It was called analyst programmer in my day. And now you've got these people, I only do front end, I only do back end, I only do this. And I'm not interested in anything else. And then getting those people to collaborate is a lot of hard work sometimes. They're just not interested. And it's like the typical Scrum team where one person sits on the corner and they call them the QA person. And they do all the testing. No, you all do testing. And quality is built in, the concept of Jidoka, building quality in. Quality isn't something that somebody's responsible for after you've done all your development work. Quality you're all responsible for. So it's these types of things, this training, this teaching, this behavior that's much more important, that needs to be well embedded. But that broad range of understanding is also important. Because if you just go and do the PMP and pass, it isn't going to make you a very useful person in an organization because you lack the understanding and the comprehension of all the moving parts that you may have to be responsible for helping plan as a project or program manager.
Right. One thing that comes to mind, I'm going to ask this question, then we'll go to the chat.
Sure.
So as you were speaking, one thing that I thought about is, is a chart. Like, assuming every PM has a chart. I don't know. So I play FIFA. I don't know if you know the video game. Like, every player sort of has a chart. Like, for example, attack, pass, passing, teamwork, and all of that, right? So I'm thinking of the same thing for a PM, right? You said technical literacy, maybe theoretical knowledge. There is orchestration, and then ethics, and then but the one where I want to get to is adaptability. Like, that point of you're thrown into a situation.
Yes.
How do you know what to do and what to deploy? Because I think like that is a muscle that can be strengthen over time, and you don't necessarily find that in the textbooks, at least as far as I'm aware of. So imagine, like, there's a PM that has that chart, everything else looks great, but that adaptability metric needs to be developed. Like, how would you what would your advice be to that person? Like, how do you strengthen that muscle and just become better?
So this is actually where good coaching comes in, and the sensei model or whatever approach you take is that people need to learn how to respond in challenging, stressful situations. Not everybody's natural at doing that. It's normal, My sister would be terrified thrown in at the deep end, where if you threw me in at the deep end, I have a way of functioning. And actually, in chaos, command and control is a technique that is necessary. If you arrive in a chaotic situation, you need somebody shouting orders at you, because this is not a time to have a meeting and have a debate and decide who's going to do what. You just need to be told what to do to respond until we calm the situation down. So we can coach people how to manage in situations that aren't calm and predictable and well orchestrated. And then over time, those people become more adaptable because they learn how to respond. And really, adaptability comes from experience. You can't teach somebody to be adaptable. We can say, look, I mean, you take a pilot on an airline. They are very much checklist driven. That's command. It's challenge response communication in the cockpit. One pilot says flaps to 30%. The other pilot sets them and repeats back flaps to 30%. Challenge response, and it's all checklist driven. But if suddenly there's something untoward happens, an engine flames out, a warning light goes on, a new pilot's going to panic and grab the checklist and start working, what they've been trained to do. But an experienced pilot's going to go, I've seen this many times before. This is the procedure we're going to go through. Here is the established checklist procedure for this. We have a process, but I'll keep everybody calm. I'll coach you in dealing with this. So that adaptability, that ability to respond to the unforeseen comes with experience. And some people are just better equipped. I mean, I'll never be a concert pianist. I could learn to play the piano. I'm never going to perform a major performance in the Royal Albert Hall in London. That just is never going to happen. So, and there are people that can learn to do things, but will never be the best to cope under immense stress. But that's where we can coach people what they should do if a situation occurs. And that's where organizations really need to start looking at what is their contingency, what is their resilience, how does an organization build in that agility to cope with situations that are unforeseen, rather than what normally happens, which is blind panic. They put 100 people in a room and you call it a war room and then start trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do. Well, wouldn't it be great if they had established ways of responding if an event occurs? And the funny thing is, we've had all these stories over time. Everybody's done these transformations, which are all nonsense. But over time, and if you ever get anybody who tells you they've worked on 20 transformations, they're lying, because transformations take years, sometimes decades. So the thing is this, but if, we've had all these incidents over time where we've had major problems occur, we assemble everybody who work really well together in a crisis. My old boss used to say, we always respond well in a crisis. But once there is no crisis, we are terrible at working together. Right. So how do we keep people with a sense of urgency without being in a crisis? And that's where organizations really need to practice and coach and establish ways of approaching challenges and problems and unforeseen or force majeure without having to be thrown into crisis mode every time it happens, because that gets expensive. And while you're managing the crisis, everything else that's not part of the crisis now falls behind, and deadlines are missed and costs escalate. So really, adaptability comes with experience, but you can coach and establish ways of managing things that could be described as chaotic or complex.
Right. And the one thing that I like that you mentioned there is, with coaching, you're learning from the experience of somebody else, right? So the person that's being coached doesn't need to learn from their own mistakes, right? You can shortcut your way and, I guess, fast track your way to becoming adaptable. And I know that this is one problem that many people in the PM community face, is because a lot of times you're sort of thrown into a chaotic situation, and you have to, and everybody's sort of looking at you to provide answers, right? And you need to present a certain level of confidence. Like, you can't quite uh be vulnerable in the organization. A lot of PMs just end up sort of trying to figure it out on their own, and many people don't even get coaching outside, right? So that's why and I'm also speaking from experience. I think a lot of times the PM position has felt like a very lonely one, right? Because you can't quite vent, internally. You can't quite talk to your colleagues because they want to get to your project as well. If you show any weakness, it's like, all right, they will plot and get your own project, right? So you're sort of just stuck,
So
in your
one thing, if you're newish to this, whether you're a new project manager or you're in your junior sort of part of your career, you need to start thinking about, what if this happens to me in the future? Don't wait until it happens. Start learning and studying. There's endless books, websites, videos, material to learn about how to deal within a crisis, because you are right. And if you've ever watched, the UK version of the show that our president used to front, The Apprentice, the most famous phrase is "you're fired," and the most often the person fired is the project manager of the thing that's been set to do during that TV show. And you don't want to be that person. You want to have a way that if the project goes off the rails, if you're in chaos, you have a way to respond, to take control, to calm things down, and to be able to present something to the organization who's looking at you and say, okay, this is how we need to respond. Work that out now, not when it happens. But that's part of the learning journey, the continuous improvement in your own abilities, not just passing a certificate and thinking you're, the best thing since sliced bread, because I'm afraid you're not.
Right. And just one thing that I would just mention is, before we go to the questions, is when you've gotten that level of competence, it is so fulfilling.
Yes.
Because like, it got to a point where it's like, I got pulled into when there was, for lack of a shit show, right? So it's just, it's there's something quite comfortable. Well, I mean, it's I'm not saying it's not stressful, but the challenge is exciting, and the fact that you have this skill set that many people don't have, like, you can be thrown into chaos, and people, like, the fact that you're brought into that situation, everybody starts to feel better.
Yes.
Like that. It's really amazing to have
that. When you walk in the room and everybody breathes a collective sigh of relief because you're there, you may be internally absolutely crapping it, because you're going, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And trust me, I've been in that room many times as that person going, I have no idea what I'm going to do. But I have some basic skills that say, let's start documenting what we know. Let's start having these conversations. Don't ever underestimate the power of Post-it notes. They're everywhere. Just, you start putting ideas on a wall, throwing things at the wall. And let me tell you, being in person in the room is a damn sight better than ever being remote. I mean, whilst the constraints are there, getting people together and starting to figure things out works really well. And don't underestimate the power of human conversation and human collaboration. But you will be in that situation where you go, I'm dying here, but you have enough in here to think, what would I do? Okay, but think about that now, not when the day comes. So at least you've got something to do. So there's some, but we can train that. I mean, experienced people can teach companies and organizations. This is what I do as a living, and equip you and prepare you. And if you are a person thinking, how do I learn this? Then start looking for people now that can teach you this. And go to meetups, go to different groups, talk to colleagues, learn from different people's experiences, and don't be afraid to try things. A lot of the time when you're in a room with people, you actually know more than they do, especially if they're looking at you for help. So if you get it wrong, they won't know you've got it wrong because they don't know any better.
Awesome. All right, so let's go to the chat now. All right, Jeffrey calling in from Atlanta. Hi, Jeffrey. Noble from Nigeria. Hi, Noble. Fabiana from Brazil. Oh my goodness, everybody.
I was in Lagos, a few months ago. So,
Oh yeah.
well, that's a crazy city, but I had so much fun in Nigeria.
Oh, amazing. All right, Justin says, burning question, Nigel. What conditions work best in an organization for agile, and what are the worst conditions to try and implement it?
So it's a management thing. You need management that are open, flexible, willing to try different things, that aren't too dogmatic. I have a slide I've been using in some of my presentations, and it basically says that if you're earning, and I know we've got an international audience, so if you're earning a six-figure package, let's call that $1 million or more in the USA, or the equivalent wherever you live in the world. My phrase is, you don't have a problem, somebody else does. So if I'm sitting in a job in America and I'm being paid a multi-million-dollar salary package, which is what most executives are being paid, I don't have a problem. The system is working really well for me. So when you come to me and tell me the system sucks and we need to change the system, I'm looking there going, as long as I meet my OKRs and KPIs, I'm good. So you need leaders that are looking beyond that lens. And that's the biggest, or the toughest, says the worst conditions, but that's the toughest nut to crack. And yes, if the level of fear or pain is great enough and those leaders fear for their own survival, they'll try anything. So that's an easy way to implement agile or some other technique. But if you're in a company that's reasonably well established and these executives are doing okay on their OKRs and KPIs, that's the hardest place to implement. So you need to understand what they see needs to be improved, and you need to learn how to talk their language and appeal to them, because very little is going to happen. You might have a lot of techies running around saying, stand up and sprint and vocabulary like that, but all these people over here are taking no notice. And I've seen this for years, over the decades, in all sizes and shapes of organization. Unfortunately, unless the management believe they need it and are engaged, it's going to be really tough to do anything with it effectively.
So, Justin, you need underpaid executives. That's what you need. People that that can barely make ends meet. Right? I'm teasing. All right. So, also from Justin, what do you think of safe and Scrum concepts?
Well, I mean, I'm biased because I did a lot of work on Scrum at scale. Scrum of Scrums is a perfectly viable, communication mechanism for teams to communicate and collaborate on problem resolution, impediments, whatever you want to call them, and to make sure everybody's aligned. If you're in a multi-team system, which is the correct phrase, more than one team, multi-team system, then these teams need to have a high level of collaboration and communication to ensure that we're all aligned on delivering to scaled goals. We call these proximal and distal goals, sprint goal, and then the goal of the multi-team system, which is, if you've got 10 teams doing a 2-week sprint, at the end of these 2 weeks, what is the combined outcome of the 10 teams that are going to be combined? So that's where Scrum of Scrums becomes a very powerful technique. You can do whatever works for you. You don't have to use it specifically Scrum of Scrums, but it's all more or less the same outcome. Now, versus safe. Well, safe is just a gigantic conglomeration of methods, tools, and approaches. Some good, some have been a bit bastardized over the time. And again, safe became more of a religion and became more of an inflexible animal. I've seen good use of safe or concepts within Scaled Agile. I've seen some incredibly bad uses of it, where it just becomes a 3-month planning session where you get told what you're going to deliver, and then it doesn't matter, and there's no agility, there's no iteration in there. You just expected to deliver the 10 or 12-week plan and it to be delivered, and no excuses. There's none of this concept of every 2 weeks talking to the customer and then changing the requirements, because guess what? They've been baked into the PI plan. That's bad safe, really bad safe. So, and that's really organizational implementation of this. You would never use safe in its entirety. You would take the elements from it that are suited and even SAFE acknowledged that with the different levels that we're trying to promote. So it's not that it's bad. There's a lot of bad implementation and bad usage of it, just as there is in any other method or approach.
Right, and I think this is something that keeps coming up again and again in this conversation, and even outside of this conversation, is that we have these certifications, this methodology, and all that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to. It's not a religion. You don't follow it to the letter. You need to be able to discern the situation that you're in and apply what is needed in that particular. And I think that's true knowledge and experience. 100%.
So, yeah, exactly. You use what works. If you're working on a project at home, you don't keep beating everything with a hammer. You'll just cause a lot of damage. You go and get the appropriate. Just because you are from the church of the hammer doesn't mean you just keep using the damned hammer. You go and use whatever. And it's the same in anything, whether it's software engineering, management, whatever. Use what works best, that's appropriate in your context to get the job done and achieve the results you're seeking. And stop being religious zealots. It's just ridiculous.
Thomas calling in from Copenhagen, Denmark. Hey, Thomas. I've never been. I would like to be to Denmark, to Copenhagen, Denmark. LinkedIn user calling in from Houston. Mohammed calling in from Sudan. Hey, Mohammed. All right. Let's see. Justin has another question, but I will maybe come back to Justin just to give other people a chance. Watch Deck. I hope I'm saying your name right. I apologize. Wojciech. I'm dealing daily with the way of how AI can best support agile teams and PMs. What do you see as the main obstacle in adapting AI in agile work?
Well, I'm excited to listen to what Jeff tells you when he comes on, because he's, a lot of his claims on Twitter and otherwise is that he has entire Scrum teams that are just AI bots now doing the work, and he has AI writing user stories and other things. But I can tell you from my own experience that I use AI extensively, and it's saved me thousands of hours of work and saved me thousands of dollars of expense, because it helps me explore ideas. It helps me with my thinking. I still do a lot of things myself. A lot of my visuals and graphics, I do hands-on with Adobe Illustrator. I don't use AI generated slop, as they call it, but I use AI to help me think about how to visualize a concept, for instance. But if I'm working on some deep research, as I am for different proposals, I'll use AI extensively to help me look at the peer-reviewed literature, look at the trends, look at the analysis out there, and it does in minutes what it would take people days or weeks or even months to do. So how can it best support agile teams and project managers in the way of using it as a tool? Number one, it is a tool. Use it. It's very effective. Now, don't believe everything it says, and whether you call it hallucinations or just the predictive nature. I mean, it's using Monte Carlo simulation basically behind the scenes to predict what the best answer is. It's getting better and better. And can it do things? Yes, it can go write code. It can create content. OpenAI have just announced it's now fully integrating Canva and lots of other products. So if you use Canva, it can go create a whole bunch of, I used it yesterday to take a 40-slide presentation and give me a 5-slide pitch deck. Now, I wouldn't use it as ChatGPT had given it me, because it's crap, but it's now given me the content I can now go visualize myself. And it did that heavy lift for me. Any research, it will go out and do in minutes, not days, hours, weeks, whatever. And so what is the main obstacle in adapting AI in agile work? Well, human reluctance, human resistance, the pushback, fear of job loss. That's real. It's coming. It's happening. There will be a lot of white collar jobs lost to AI. I absolutely guarantee that. Everybody who's in the industry can see that happening. Will it replace everybody? No. The best thing humans have got going for them is these things on the end of their arms, because it's very difficult for AI to do anything that it involves dexterity, even with modern robotics and machinery. So plumbers, as Jeffrey Hinton said, and actually the boss of NVIDIA came out the other day and said the next millionaires will be plumbers, because AI can't go do plumbing. but use AI to do the things that take you lots of hours and it's lots of hard work. But you have to, that's the human agent teaming, HAT, or human AI teaming. You have to find ways for AI to support the teams. There's lots of ways it can be done. Trust me, Jeff will have many more ideas than me when you have him on your show.
Nice. We can all go be plumbers. Everyone needs to take a dump, right? Safe to fail experiments resonate strongly. I've been in projects so complex, but additionally did not have safe to fail wiggle room to untangle, which became a bigger challenge. Okay, so that's a comment from Darren.
But that's a management issue again. So, people talk about psychological safety, and the minute a manager says to you, this is a psychologically safe environment, it is now not a psychologically safe environment, yeah? Because it's not. So all leaders can do is create the environment to enable safety to emerge by removing fear and threat and things of that nature. But once you say to somebody, you can say what you want, you're psychologically safe, now you've scared them to death. So the reality of it is, if an organization is talking safe to fail experiments, they need to make sure you have an environment and the ability, because otherwise you don't get creativity or innovation. It's stifled, you kill it. And so it's a management issue that needs to be addressed, and good coaching, hire me. Good coaching is a way to solve that, coaching leadership.
Yeah, that's nice. Once they say psychologically safe, now you're psychologically safe. Yeah. All right. Bilal says, as AI becomes more embedded in project management processes, how do we ensure that support not overrides human judgment, especially in complex or ethically sensitive?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And so I can see in the short to medium term middle management being replaced by AI decision making. You already have it in banks, and you apply for a bank loan or a mortgage or something, or some financing, and machines are making the decisions already. Whether that's AI or just a deterministic algorithm, it's making a decision. So at some point there will be decisions made by bots, whether they're deterministic or probabilistic, which is where we're heading. So, and that's going to be a real challenge. And I think that whether it's HR or all of the departments that manage the ethics within companies I think ethics are going to be a real career for some people, at least in the short to medium term. And how do we make sure? Well, we've got to put in the checks and balances and safeguards. Simon Wardley talks about making the training data sets being open source so they're visible, so we can see how the AI models have been trained. But the reality of it is, and I'm sorry, the world's a greedy place. People care only about themselves. Very few people are altruistic. And most countries and most large companies will do whatever they can to make more money and control more of the market. And this ethical human judgment thing will be a lower priority than making money and succeeding and winning in the market and competition. So it's going to be a very challenging area. It worries me to death, but I do think you will find that in organizations, some decisions are being made by machines, and it will be down to companies to put in the safeguards and checks and balances to ensure that doesn't cause us a significant problem.
For sure. So before I move on to the next question, I just want to say hello to Muhaya from Egypt. I think I skipped over you. Well, lots of countries here represented.
It's incredible.
Yeah. All right. So what's the next question? So this is, from LinkedIn user. As someone with several years of project management experience, what strategies or skills shift would you recommend for successfully transitioning into a program manager role?
Well, I mean, so in simple terms, a program manager manages multiple projects or manages multiple project managers, but there's different definitions of it, and you can pull the definitions from there. For me, the biggest skill for anybody working with people is communication. You have to be able to bring people together, to help them collaborate, to help them communicate more effectively, to resolve conflict. In one of the books we wrote, we talk about the sort of the 9 C's of project management, which is all about communication, collaboration, conflict resolution, this type, cooperation, these types of things. There are certain things you cannot change, like sometimes the composition of a team, sometimes the context what the team is in, but you can do a lot to work on those other aspects. And I truly do believe this. Communication is the primary skill, because you have to get people talking and solve political challenges, solve differences of opinion, bring people to a place that they can live with. And when I learned Lego serious play years ago, a lot of fun learning to use Lego in management, but the Lego serious play talks about getting people to a place that they can live with the decision. And that's a skill a program manager really has, when you bring in these disparate groups together to align them on a strategy or on a decision or on a way of getting things done. And some people have a natural ability for that. Some people don't. It's the concert pianist thing. Some people will be amazing musicians. Some people will just enjoy playing an instrument. And program managers are those amazing musicians. And they're a rare breed. And when you find them, you got to hold on to them and nurture them, because that's who makes you successful.
So a couple of things I want to say there. Nigel, you mentioned that there was a book with the 9 C's. What's the name of that book?
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. Well, it's the flow system books. There's 2. There's the flow system itself.
Okay.
And then there's the flow system playbook.
Okay.
They're both on Amazon. The first book is really the deep academic read. You see, I even have bookmarks in my own books. That's how hard it is to read. But the playbook is much more about the how-to. And actually on the website, one of our websites, getflowtrain.com, there's a lot of free material on that website. And we did that on purpose because there's people in parts of the world where they don't have the money to buy books, and they're not easily available as well. So we put a lot of the material on the getflowtrained.com website. And you can go download worksheets and illustrations, and they're all free of charge, PDF format. And then that will help you learn, or at least be a starting point, lots of references and things to learn some of this stuff. And then, as I say, in parts of the world, there's many people that represent some of those parts of the world where there aren't rich countries, there's challenges in getting resources and other things. They can benefit from those, and that will help them as a starting point. But the 9 C's are in there. It's part of that material. And they can start to look at those elements that really bring people together as high-performing teams. And that's part of the section of the book we talk about team science, which is my colleague, Professor John Turner, who's a deep expert in that, and my other colleague, Brian Rivera, who came from the military side of things. He talks about human and organizational performance and high-performing teams and high-reliability organizations, safety 2.0. So there's a lot of that type of content. And these are some of the words that, when people listen to this back or look at the transcripts, these are some of the words that people should go Google and then start reading a bit to understand this. Because if you want to be that key person that everybody comes to, which is actually a bad thing, by the way, it's called the hero concept, but we don't want heroes. But if you are the person everybody looks to for support, these are the things you need to know, because they're looking to you to bring people together and get them collaborating and communicating and drawing this together and solving challenges and problems together. And these are the types of things that people need to learn.
Right. No, thanks for sharing that. Because the one thing you hear this over and over again, like, the project manager's job is, 80% communication, program, but like, how do you do that, right? And everybody claims that they're like, if you look at everybody's CV, oh, I'm an excellent communicator, but like they're levels. And when you're good, like, people really want you, and that translates into how you're remunerated, the positions that you get. And so basically, if you wanted to achieve mastery in this, like, what would you recommend? Like, because everybody, like, everybody claims to be good communicators, and there are lots of things that you can do, but how do you really truly become a master? And to add to that, just on your point, those, like there are some people that are master pianists. Even the master pianists, they put in a lot of hours to become master pianists, right? So, Nigel, how does somebody actually achieve mastery in communication?
So a lot of it is just experience and practice. Fall down, get up again, try something, fail, learn from it, try it again, fail, learn from it. And eventually you start to get more effective, more proficient at it. Now, mastery is something we aspire to. I don't think there are few people who ever achieve what we call a grand mastery of a topic. The concept pianist, you're right. I mean, most of these experts will put in 12 hours a day of practice. The top sports stars, whatever your favorite sport is, those top sporting personalities, those folks live it. Lewis Hamilton, as a multi-millionaire, very successful businessman, lives on the racetrack. Despite all this playboy antics and things you see, I have a great deal of respect for him. And other people in Formula One racing, they're on the track constantly putting hundreds of hours of practice in to maintain their skill. If you want to be a programmer, a project manager, or an agilist, or whatever role you want to be, if you think you just pass a training course, you go on a couple of weeks training, you pass it and you're done, that's not, it's like learning to drive. You pass your driving test, then you spend the next 10 years mastering the craft and becoming a really good driver. Hopefully, it's the same with anything in this. You've got to constantly read, study, practice, fail, learn, try things, listen to people, find yourself. A friend of mine, Pam, hey Pamela, if you're out there listening, Pam Duke, she will talk a lot about the importance of a network of people who you look to for mentorship. So you need to look at who your mentors are. Who are the people you respect, you look up to in life, that you follow without being paid for them? True leaders are people who have followers who aren't paid to follow them. So that's the distinction between what people call themselves leaders in companies. You're only there while they're paying you salary. But, there are people in life you follow and you read what they write. You listen to them. You may be fortunate to know them and talk to them. They're your mentors. You've got to surround yourself with these people so they guide and advise you. And over time, through experience and more failures than successes, you will learn what works and become more competent and valuable. And it's not about taking certification. Learn methodology is great. Learn how to use a tool. That's fantastic. But that's not going to make you a great project or program manager.
Right, amazing. Just quickly on that, just before we get to recommendations, I think what I really liked about that is just being very intentional, because many people can just exist and just accumulate years of experience, right? But there's a difference between somebody who surrounds themselves with a network of mentors, studies, learns from their mistakes, take risks, and just keep on that daily practice of honing your craft. Like at the end of 5 years, your 5 years experience will be very different from somebody's 10 years of experience that was just existing and just collecting a paycheck, right? So I really like that intentionality that you mentioned.
Trust me, the stuff I thought I knew 10 years ago, I now know was a load of nonsense. And I'm sure 5 years from now, I'll still be looking back going, why did I ever say that? So it is truly important. And you fail more than you succeed. And that's part of learning,
Amazing. I know we are over time now, but just quickly, because I know, Nigel, you will have to leave. Just recommendations. So we normally do this at the end of every episode. What's one book that you love or recommend?
Oh, wow. It depends where you want to go with that. But I'd read anything on Toyota, number one. Just pick up it. So, if you want to read Jeff Lyker and Mike Rother's books, absolutely phenomenal. Anything that was ever published by Norman Bodek over the years, and you can go Productivity Press, just go look at any of those books. That will give you a really strong grounding in lean thinking, which underpins all the things we've been talking about. It was all inspired by that. And, by all means, feel free to go read the Flow System books that myself and my colleagues publish, because writing books is miserable, folks. 2 years of labor for unless you're writing romance novels, you'll never make money from books. There's a recommendation. Go write romance novels.
PM romance novels. Nice.
Yeah. Hey, look at, Goldratt wrote the book, which was more of a novel, yeah? So the goal. So go write a romantic project management book. I don't know. There's the thing. There's an idea for a budding author out there.
That's a new genre. All right. So one app that you love or recommend?
One app.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, look, I use Adobe Illustrator all the time, but that's for personal visualization. My strong advice is go try out all the AI apps, study them, play with them. I use OpenAI a lot. I use Gemini a lot. I use Grok. Some people love Perplexity. Grok's great for when you want an answer that the ethics in OpenAI won't give you the answer. So there's a tip. I also use HeyGen for doing AI animations and things. I have my own digital avatar, saved me hundreds of hours of work. In addition to that, I use I forget the name of this. The app that I've cloned my voice, and I now use an AI app to do a lot of narration for me, and that's actually saved me a lot of time.
11 Labs.
11 Labs, yeah, absolutely. But rather than just recommending anyone, go try them out. This is part of learning. I mean, I've recorded some really cool videos. I've composed songs. I've done a lot of cool stuff, mainly for fun in keynote presentations that I could never have imagined doing before. And I knock them out in 2 or 3 hours of work using a multiple set of tools, a bit of Adobe Premiere skills of my own. So it really is, from a point of view, recommending one, go study them. AI is where it's at right now. If you're not talking about AI, if you don't have experience with AI, nobody's looking at you. Now, will it burst? Yes, of course it will burst at some point. Every man and his dog has got an AI product today. Most of those will disappear and the big ones will stay. AI is here to stay. At some point, the bubble will burst. People will get burnt fingers from it. There'll be a lot of financial chaos, but it doesn't stop you becoming expert and understanding these tools. And there's many of the questions have asked how to use them effectively in the work and in the careers that you're following. Sorry, Mukhtar, you're going to ask more questions.
No, all good. We have just 3 more. Any podcast you love or recommend?
Yeah, the Infinite Monkey Cage on the BBC. Deeply clever scientists that are on it, along with comedians. They explore some really, if you're into string theory and cool things about the universe, the life, the meaning of everything, 42 and all that sort of stuff, then the Infinite Monkey Cage on the BBC is one of my favorites of all time.
Okay. Your favorite productivity hack?
Productivity hack? Oh, hack.
Yeah.
This thing behind me. Visualize everything. Don't call it a Kanban board. Just visualize work. Make work visible. And I mean all work visible. If you can't see the work, you don't understand it, make it visible. It's the most powerful communication tool. And once I put it on a Post-it note, I don't have to remember it. And there's so many things you forget, you get confused, you get overwhelmed in your daily life. I put everything on our work stuff, personal stuff, everything, because then I can take, and if I'm going on a weekend away, I take a picture of it with my iPhone, and then I've got it with me. And if I think, oh crap, what was that thing? Then I can look at it and remember. Make work visible are the 3 words you should always remember.
Nice. When you're overwhelmed, how do you reset?
I go and do something that has nothing to do with work, whatever that means. I go and start pulling pulling old motorcycles apart. I go for a motorcycle ride. I go and get my bike and go for a ride. And trust me, when you're whipping around the bends above the legal speed limit, you have nothing. You cannot focus on any of this other stuff because you will crash and burn real fast. But then I do find, for mental health reasons, having something where I'm using tools, I'm doing something physically. It's very different to my day-to-day work. I'm in that different zone, as Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, we talked about flow. You get in that zone and nothing else matters. So whether you play sport, play instruments, you do art, do something with your family, just get away from what you do. And somebody just said a short pencil is better than a long memory. 100% agree with you. Yeah, Sharpies and Post-it notes. And I'll just acknowledge Dominic when he's saying, apart from assemblage, which has a real good meaning in French, Bricolage, is the other thing that we would use in French. Great words for people to go and look what they mean.
Amazing. So, Nigel, is agile becoming obsolete?
Agile training and certification is dead. The concept of agility and being agile is alive and living, just like gravity, just like oxygen. But it depends on how you approach your context with the tools and with the attitudes and the behaviors as to whether or not it is effective for you.
Well said. Nigel, for those that want to connect with you and learn more about what you do, how can they do that?
You'll find me if you just Google me. You'll find all sorts of stuff. My own website, nigelthurlow.com. Of course, LinkedIn is where I tend to cause a lot of upset with people and throw out my crazy ideas. But you can find me quite easily. And there's lots of links out there if you want to meet with me and have a conversation. You can find a way to do that.
Amazing, Nigel. I really enjoyed this conversation. This was fun, and I'm sure many people listening did as well. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Next week, same time, we're going to have a show with somebody else. It could be me. It could be somebody else. Still trying to work out who the guest will be. But thank you all for tuning in, and speak to you soon. Take care.
Thank you.